Welcome back, all my 40K fanatics out there. I'm DJ here with Tim's Nation to talk to you about Grey Knights. We seen some stuff happen in the data slates. Not a lot, but one very important factor. And that kind of is something that I think most people would think, oh man, is that going to change the list? As some of you would know, and friends of the channel, I am getting ready to go back to a GT. I need to. I can feel the itch. I need to get to a tournament, a 2-day event, and I found one. I've signed up. I'm registered. It's happening. It's happening. But the question comes down to what army. I've been helping Lane prep for a bunch of GTs and haven't focused on myself. So over the last couple of weeks, I've been kind of working towards Grey Knights, believing that they would probably be the list I would take. And last week, I ran a very heavy MSU Artificer Armored Infantry-based detachment that did well. It did really well. It did what I wanted it to do. At the end of the game, Lane questioned its ability to be able to handle vehicle armies. So we asked, what would you guys like to see? What should I run into for Grey Knights? And the answer was Chaos Knights, specifically Armature Span, by a wide margin. So Lane will be bringing Armature Spam here today to face off against my Grey Knights. Now, a lot of that was justified into the realm of the list I was playing at that time, and if that list would have legs going into, well, that many vehicles. Vehicles are very popular right now in the meta, so can it do it? Now with the balanced data slates that we saw, our Warpbane task force got hit a little bit with one very crucial, very specific change. Hallowed Ground rerolls can only be taken for units when they're attacking a visible target. This means that not only the Purge, which is a primary element of my army, cannot gain those rerolls to hit when firing indirect at all. Also, there's also a weird little addendum that kind of got hit in the crossfire too, that if we're fighting units behind a wall that we can't see because we're using the terrain rules to be able to still be in combat, if we can't see them, we can't do the rerolls there either. Which that was kind of one of the crossfires, but it is definitely something we got to keep an eye on and make sure to try and play around, because if we charge a unit that's close to a wall in attempts to fight them through the wall, if we can't physically see them, we're not getting those rerolls for Hallowed Ground. So that's going to be a very key point to keep in mind. Now, when you see a change like that, I know the first thing that people would think is, okay, so what is this going to change for your list? You see these changes, you see this stuff, so what are you going to change? What are you going to switch up? And my answer is initially, absolutely nothing. So we are still going forward with Chaos Knights facing off against the Grey Knights. Nothing from this is going to change. And the reason being is that I still see a lot of value behind the Purge. It gets me up to 22 side cannons in the list. They're able to, it's a 5-man MSU unit that, again, with the Grey Knight capabilities and everything that the Army is able to do with picking up units and putting them back down, that's still 4 side cannons. Land them near purifiers, look at their target, and put the shots on target. The fact that they have artillery abilities is cool. But with the with the cover and them only being AP1, sometimes that gets a little not as strong as you'd like it to be. So I'm okay with the realm of trying to do this with just the straight side cannons. Could this cause me some changes after this matchup? Well, that's why we're doing this game. That's why we're doing this match, so we can see what happens, because I'd much rather get beat here in the basement as opposed to getting beat at a GT in the 3rd or 4th round by a vehicle-heavy army and going, well, wish I would have practiced that a little more. So, all right, let's go over the list real quick. If you want a super detailed description, I did 2 other prior videos to it that you can see here on the channel. But we're going to kind of go over a light graze of what we're doing here today, and probably actually in some ways a more condensed and comprehensive idea, since I have run this list a couple times already. So let's take a look. All right, here we go. This is the Warpbane Task Force. Like I mentioned, the only change with this for the balanced data slates is the fact that units in Hallowed Ground are not allowed to gain the rerolls when targeting units that are not visible. So got to make sure we can see them with the models in unit that we're attacking with. So that's going to be a big one. Hallowed Ground, real quick, just to go over it. Hallowed Ground gives you reroll, or I'm sorry, the detachment rule is full rerolls of 1 to hit for models in the unit. They gain an additional reroll to wound, or full reroll to hit, if they are fully within hollowed ground. Hollowed ground is obtained if you are fully within your deployment zone, if you control at least half the objective markers at the beginning of any phase in no man's land, then the no man's land is hollowed ground that you're wholly within. And if you control your opponent's home field objective marker, then that deployment zone is hollowed ground. Also, the purifiers are a beacon of hollowed ground, giving off a 6-inch aura, which is a big reason why I have so many of them in this list here today. So let's start off with them. We have 30 purifiers. 2 of the squads are going to have 4 side cannons, 1 has 4 incinerators. Typically, the incinerators are led by Castle and Crow. I got to think about that a little bit today going into this matchup, because those incinerators are not going to be as much value going into Knights. Now, I say that with a grain of salt, because we do have an awesome stratagem that these guys can utilize, all purifiers can utilize, for 1 command point to get full rerolls to wound. That being said, since the squad's going to have full rerolls to hit just because they're purifiers, that might be enough to put a heavy amount of incinerators onto a target. Since they are strength 6, those as well as the side cannons are both going to be wounding things like the armigers on 5s. So, and while the side cannons are 2 damage each, the incinerators are just volumes of shots. So there might be something to say there. Now, granted, the Purifying Flame is not going to matter into this matchup, being its anti-infantry 2-up. It's going to be wounding on 6s, but again, that unit that has that reroll to wound perk from the stratagem, at least it's volume of shots. So one thing these guys are going to be able to do is put out a volume of shots. Otherwise, these guys are, once one model is removed, they're looking at +1 to hit, and if they go below half strength, they get +1 to wound as well. So these guys can still smack even down the last couple models, as we see in the last game, where I was beating up a Land Raider and a Dreadnought with only 3 and 4 guys remaining, all the way down to the squad being eliminated. Very strong stratagem, very strong unit, and it's going to be kind of the backbone of my army. Now, they are toughness 4, which means that they're going to take a little bit more damage. We do have a 4-up invuln strat if someone hits us really hard with high AP, but only in shooting. And yeah, I mean, the toughness 4 is going to be rough. We got a 2-up save base, so that's really good to help push us through. But yeah, toughness 4 all day on these guys. 2 wound Marines. Things can get squishy for them real quick if someone lines up the right shot. So still got to be kind of particular with how they're going to be deployed. Speaking of deployed, we are going to be bringing a Land Raider Crusader. Now, this is one realm where I'm kind of in consideration because the Interceptors dropped in points. And I think with a little bit of finagling, I could turn this guy into a standard Land Raider with las cannons, re-rolling. And if I had that Land Raider today, man, those armigers would be quaking. But we don't. Instead, we're bringing the Crusader. What's nice about the Crusader is it's going to be able to be a delivery system for 10 purifiers, as well as putting a 5-man squad of interceptors in there. Interceptors can utilize getting out of a vehicle, disembarking very, very well, since that +3 move puts them up to 15 inches, and then they have their shoot and move option, but more on them later. The Crusader itself, with the assault ramp, we can move, disembark, and attack with, and still charge with the unit that disembarked. It has a 12-inch move, 2 extra inches than the regular Land Raider does, and with the disembarking 3 inches means that those guys are going to be getting out basically 15 inches away from where this thing started to then possibly be able to charge. Things like the purifiers that have full rerolls to hit, this can mean that they, in typical matchups that are not of the high vehicle quality, could possibly pick up 2 squads and clear a screen all by themselves and still stand strong where they're at. On top of that, the Land Raider itself is no slouch. Having those purifiers that disembark and give the Purifying Flame, the Hollowed Ground back to the Land Raider allows the Hurricane Bolters to have full rerolls to hit on top of their twin linked for full rerolls to wound. So that's a lot of damage coming off of them. You have Assault Cannon, Multi-Melta, Storm Bolter, and Hunter Killer Missile, all as well for extra damage. Hunter Killer being able to reroll hits is nice. Very, very nice. And the Multi-Melta as well, too. Since we're getting this guy up close and personal, we can get that Melta damage in there, as we saw last game, being able to rip and shred through a Rhino to get the infantry on board. All in all, this guy is cheaper than the regular Land Raider, and he's also nice to be able to hold kind of a backfield objective in the early points of the game, where your opponent has to dedicate something real to even threaten it. And at the time that they do, they're now starting to play their hand where we can start to counter and remove those threatening units before they threaten other things like the purifiers and bigger units in our army. Next up, as we talked about them, the namesake, we do have the Purge. We have 3 5-man squads of Purge, and much like I mentioned, I love the fact just how many side cannons they bring. For their point cost, I could drop them and bring a squad of strike. I could bring another squad of interceptors, which is tempting in some ways. We'll see how that works out this game. But the big part is these guys get 4 side cannons. They're OC1 as opposed to the OC2 of the strike. But these guys have that same Grey Knight ability to pick up, jump around the table, and do all those fun things. So these guys play into that MSU style really, really well. On top of the fact of just being able to absolutely shred through a lot of things with those side cannons. Now, they do have the capability of firing indirect, as long as another Grey Knight unit can see the target they want to shoot to. Kind of a psychic link, if you will. But now with the data slate updates, they won't be re-rolling the hits. I will still utilize this artillery factor. Being able to stand behind a wall, hold an objective, and shoot at a unit is still value. Just because we don't have the re-rolls doesn't mean it doesn't still have value. And with the fact that we get 12 shots per unit with side cannons, that's at 2 damage, that can still rifle away things. You know, if you have a 5-man Marine squad that's approaching you and trying to get into your face, they could pick off a couple of the guys before they get in there, and you still have your Justicar that's able to, you know, smack with his force sword. On top of that, there is another strat that allows us to increase the charge distance or reduce their charge move by 1 inch or 2 inches in hollow ground for a single CP. Being able to zone out units that have a 9-inch rerollable charge coming out of Deep Strike and then turning that into an 11-inch charge can really cost someone to lose a couple of turns and still allow you to pick the Purifiers up, the Purge Squad up, and get them out of that situation before they get completely shredded and smacked by something like, oh, I don't know, Deathwatch Terminators. Next up, we'll move over into the Interceptors. Interceptors are an excellent, excellent piece to be able to play the game with just in general. They are 12-inch move, they shoot and can move again, and they are also good in combat with a 2-up save, so they're pretty defensive. These guys can deep strike, so we're able to pick them up and do all the same Grey Knight shenanigans that you know so well. And on top of it, they utilize being in a transport very well. So putting them in the Land Raider means they can disembark 3 inches before it moves, move their 12, or advance if need be, shoot without the advance, because they don't have assault, shoot, and then move an additional 6 inches to get on an objective, get into a corner, engage on all fronts, behind enemy lines, things like that, and score secondaries. Makes these guys excellent secondary scoring units. Even though they're only OC1, they do still do well for stealing objectives where an opponent may have inched out in a building to barely touch or barely be in range of an objective. To score it, only putting like OC1 on it, you can land, shoot, move on to it, putting 2 or 3 models. You may lose the interceptors, but you take away crucial scoring points, which is a big part of what these guys are utilized for, is not only scoring points, but the ability to take points away from your opponent. Because once that command phase moves, and once you score those points, that's it. They don't get to go back and say, well, if I do this, no, I control that objective. So it's a very, very strong ability. That's why I love them in most armies. Next up, we do have a 5-man squad of strike being led by our Brotherhood champion. This is a nice little unit that I like a lot. Number one, they're able to provide an excellent heroic intervention thing, something Lane's been doing that I kind of brought over here with it. You can take these guys if you're able to wrap it in. If you pick them up, put them in deep strike, you can put them in a defensive position behind a unit. So if that unit gets charged, you can countercharge with these guys. And because of the fight first on the Brotherhood champion, smack before they do. On top of it, the Brotherhood champion has reroll hits and wounds into character units, which makes them very nice to be able to smack some units that are led by a character and do the additional mortal wounds from the enhancement that I gave him, so that every wound of his 5 attacks, if he wounds with all 5, will do 5 mortal wounds in addition to the damage from failed armor saves. So, and these guys being OC2 allows them to do some silly shenanigans, where if we do pick them up, we can drop them wholly within 6 inches of a purifier unit, which would be hollow ground, and within outside of 6 inches of an opposing unit, maybe something on an objective marker, and charge in and steal the objective. That means that since it's the end of the fight charge phase, we move into the fight phase. At the beginning of the fight phase, we control that objective, and maybe their home field objective per se. Now it's hollow ground. Now we got full re-rolls to hit with the whole unit. So that OC2 is really nice on these guys to be able to steal that objective and score those, not just score the points, but be able to score additional hits because of the full re-rolls to hit being across the unit. And that Grey Knight fighting profile with a 3 attack, strength 6, AP 2 damage that we see across most of their force weapons. And last, but sure, actually it is kind of least, we have an exaction squad. So this squad kind of falls into a fold with a couple other Imperial Agent units, one of which is the Breachers, which is kind of back and forth on should I go Breachers? Breachers are OC2. They also get buffs when shooting at units that are on objective markers and like ignore cover and stuff like that. But when you really look at it, and you look at the data sheets, and you realize the fact that this is an allied unit, not a unit out of agents or Imperial fleet with those buffs, neither one of these units is really going to do any damage to most tougher targets. Yeah, some little lightweight squads, some 5 or 10 mans with light armor or toughness 3, sure, they can do work into them, but against most things that are going to threaten that home field objective aggressively, they're really not going, neither squad's really going to do any damage outside of without having the buffs from Imperial Navy. Now, what these guys do and what put it over for the exaction squad is the medic who gives us D3 return on units. I do like the battle shock little buff that the unit brings, that I can hit an objective marker and cause a bunch of units of battle shock. It's pretty cool. Probably won't use it as frequently, maybe late game, here or there. But the big factor is the fact that they can heal D3 models. If your opponent has nothing else to do and they're able to pelt you with some artillery rounds into a unit that's holding your backfield and just try and clear that unit and go, okay, well, I'm going to take points away from you or open up a position to deep strike units in, these guys can heal themselves and at least get back some of those models to keep that coverage going. While the Breachers have the OC2 value and are able to hit those units on objectives, if they're on the objective already, they're probably going to get charged and they're not going to really see much of that shot for being able to do that. The Exaction Squad kind of exists more in a realm to stay back and just hold off the objective, letting my opponent take the objective, and then having the Exaction Squad try to take it back, whether it's through battle shocking them away from it or just trying to get in there and out OC them. They also have 11 models as opposed to the Breachers 10 because they bring that adorable little Cyber Mastiff, so they have the 11th guy in there. But a lot of it really just comes down to the healing aspect for this unit that I really like a lot and I feel kind of outweighs the OC2 in this scenario, since you're able to continuously heal and bring back those models even if they get hit indirectly. And there you have it. There's the list. So like I mentioned, the Purge got smacked a little. And we did lose some buffs there. That kind of matters. But we're going to see how much that matters. Because I have been kind of playing in a play style where I don't mind putting the Purge straight down a lane to be able to, one, gain the hollow ground off the Purifiers if we don't control the objective at the point that I'm hitting, as well as being able to have that +1 to hit pseudo, hitting on their ballistic skill, hitting on 3s versus hitting on 4s because of indirect fire. So I have been enjoying that a lot, and since they are MSU based, I can pick them up and utilize them for other secondaries across the game, which is a big part of my army having so much MSU. And when you start looking into the MSU break, I know some people say, well, why not look at Terminators? They're very tough, they're very durable, because a squad of 5 Terminators is just barely cheaper than 10 Strike even. So having the cheaper units, having a bunch of bodies to be able to bounce around the field, cover the field, score these objectives. So even in matchups like where we're going into today, going into the War Dogs, I may get tabled. I may get beat up and be reduced down to just a couple of models. But the critical thing is being able to control enough of the board and score enough points that even if I have nothing left at the end of the game, I'm still able to outscore my opponent and win the game in general. And that's kind of the goal with this army and all around, is it's not necessarily what I'm destroying, it's just destroy the scoreboard. That's where I want to go. And you don't care if you score 89 points. If I score 90 points or more, I win the game. That's kind of the theory basis with this army where I'm trying to go into is make sure I'm constantly scoring points. With that being said, the biggest thing that I have to worry about and concern myself in that aspect is the high OC value for those armatures. Those armatures have a very high objective control value, which honestly trumps majority of my army and units. In some scenarios, I have to put like a full 10-man squad of purifiers onto an objective just to stop one armature from holding that objective. That's one. Lane's got 13. So that's going to be a tough point. You know, if Lane puts one armature on every single objective, it's going to be difficult for that. And that's when I'm going to have to start being able to remove them. So keeping my force concentrated, keeping them hitting objectives, and trying to clear the field as best I can in areas and force him to spread out his forces is going to be critical. You know, scoring secondary primaries early is going to be a big part of it. Trying to get some points out there early, it is going to be a big part of the army. And something I've noticed with this over the last couple of games I played, I played Canoptic Court, similar detachment with holding objectives and stuff like that. I feel like this detachment, I have more difficulty obtaining hallowed ground in no man's land than I did with Canoptic Court. I feel like Canoptic Court has a lot more offensive aggression with some units that I was able to get control in no man's land with things like Wraiths and stuff like that and keep it, where I don't have as much in this detachment, but the Purifiers offset that balance, where I end up having the hallowed ground because the Purifiers and just how much coverage they have. I think Purifiers present a interesting threat to the War Dogs. The Carnivores, the close combat ones, are the ones that scare me the most. They're fast. Lane has access to a strat to send them through walls, so I can't really rely on hiding behind a wall to mitigate traffic. So the Purifiers are going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting there. The question is going to be, can I at least, even so, take out 2 armatures per squad of Purifiers? That's going to be a big part of it, trying to be able to keep that offset, and that would put the point trade in my favor if I can take out 2 armatures per squad of Purifiers. Now, granted, that's only 6. It's not even half of the armatures he has. But if a majority of those are Carnivores and the combat ones, that allows me to be able to kind of tie up some of his armatures. Granted, they can shoot at their vehicles, but at least it allows me to slow down his progression and try to remove things in that sense. So the Carnivores are probably going to be the biggest threat, and I really got to watch that OC value going into this matchup with all these vehicles. So, all right. Well, that's about it. Now it's just going to be time to see, can the Grey Knights prevail into this vehicle-heavy list and into vehicle-heavy in general, or will the vehicles seem to be too much? As always, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.